I'd been dreaming of a quiet place for years, somewhere far from city noise, traffic, and people who thought they could tell you how to live. When I found the cabin nestled deep in the pine-covered hills, it felt like fate. The property was old but strong, stone foundation, cedar siding, and a wraparound porch that faced a lake so still it looked like glass. I signed the papers that same week, proud to finally own something untouched by modern nonsense like HOAs and neighborhood committees. The previous owner, an older man with kind eyes, gave me one last piece of advice as he handed over the keys. "Watch out for Karen," he said, half joking, half serious. "She thinks the whole valley belongs to her HOA." I chuckled, thinking he was exaggerating. The nearest houses were miles away. What could a suburban busybody want with a mountain cabin? But after a few peaceful weeks, I learned he hadn't been joking. The first letter arrived in my mailbox, an envelope marked urgent. HOA compliance notice. Inside was a typed warning about non-conforming structures and unauthorized exterior modifications. I thought it was a mistake and tossed it out. The second letter came 2 days later. This one signed Karen, HOA president. It demanded I register my property with her association immediately, or face penalties. That's when I realized this woman wasn't just confused. She was obsessed. I ignored the threats and focused on restoring the place, repainting the porch and clearing fallen branches. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At night, motion lights flicked on without cause. Once I thought I saw a car idling at the end of my driveway. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down I knew trouble was coming. The letters didn't stop. Every few days, another envelope appeared in my mailbox, each more demanding than the last. Karen's tone shifted from friendly reminder to full-blown authority, as if she truly believed I was bound by her rules. One note claimed my porch light was too bright. Another said my woodpile was unsightly and in violation of Section 14B. I laughed at the absurdity. My cabin wasn't even in her jurisdiction, but the laughter faded when she started including photographs. Someone had been taking pictures of my property from the road. My truck, my front door, even me chopping firewood. It was invasive, unsettling, and illegal. I called the sheriff's office to ask what could be done, but they told me unless she stepped onto my land, it was technically public space. Karen knew that and she used it like a weapon. Soon the letters turned to threats. She wrote that if I didn't cooperate, she would escalate to enforcement measures. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded menacing enough. I started keeping the envelopes as evidence. Then one morning I found a neatly folded note tucked under my gate latch. No postage, no envelope. It read, "You are required to allow inspection of your premises within 7 days." I stared at the words, my stomach tightening. She had been to my gate. That night, I installed a set of trail cameras along the tree line and near the gate. It made me feel safer, though I doubted it would stop her. People like Karen didn't understand boundaries. They thrived on control. The forest that once felt peaceful now seemed to hum with tension, every snapping twig making me glance toward the shadows. The mountains were quiet, but I could feel her closing in. The morning I discovered the tampered lock, the air was cold and still. I had gone into town for supplies, and when I returned, something felt off before I even reached the porch. The gate, which I always kept padlocked, hung slightly ajar. My stomach tightened as I stepped closer and saw the scrape marks. Someone had tried to pry it open. The padlock was still there, but the metal was bent, as if someone had forced tools against it. I scanned the dirt road for tire tracks and noticed a set of footprints leading up to the gate. Smaller, likely a woman's. My pulse quickened. I hurried to the cabin and checked my security cameras. I'd installed them as a precaution, half thinking I was being paranoid, but now I was grateful I had. When I played the footage, my blood boiled. There she was, Karen. Her floral cardigan, big sunglasses, and clipboard gave her away instantly. She stood at my gate, shaking the lock and peering through the bars like she owned the place. Then she lifted her phone and snapped photos before leaving in her silver SUV. I drove straight to the sheriff's office and showed them the footage. The deputy watched it, sighed, and said there wasn't much they could do, unless she caused damage or entered the property. Technically, he said, she's still on public ground. I couldn't believe it. Karen had nearly broken my lock, but the law was on her side. I drove home angry and uneasy, replaying her smug expression in my mind. I replaced the lock with a heavier one and posted private property. No trespassing signs around the fence line. Still, I knew she'd be back. People like Karen didn't accept no for an answer. They pushed until something broke. A week later, my fears came true. I returned from a supply run to find the gate wide open, the heavy-duty lock I'd installed lying in the dirt, cleanly cut through with bolt cutters. My stomach dropped as I stepped out of the truck. The tire marks in the gravel told the story. Someone had driven right up to the cabin. My trail cameras caught it all. Karen wearing gardening gloves and a sun visor, hauling her clipboard like a badge of authority. She'd pulled up, cut the lock without hesitation, and marched through the gate as if it were her divine right. She was talking on her phone the whole time, waving her hands, probably ranting to one of her HOA board members about violations. What she didn't know was that my cousin Ryan, a SWAT officer, had asked if he and his team could use my cabin for a private training exercise that morning. I'd given them permission, thinking it would just be a harmless drill. I never expected Karen to crash the session. The timing was pure irony. Almost poetic justice. According to the footage, Karen strutted right up to the porch, yelling something about unauthorized structures and safety code inspections. She didn't even notice the black SUV parked nearby, or the muffled voices inside. The second she grabbed the door handle, the door swung open, and 6 tactical officers stepped out, fully geared, weapons drawn in formation. I wasn't there to see it live, but I could imagine the look on her face. The shock, the fear, the realization that her obsession had finally caught up with her. By the time I arrived, everything was already unfolding. Karen's arrogance had led her straight into the last place she expected. A live SWAT operation in progress. Karen had been mid-sentence when the cabin door opened. Her voice, shrill and commanding, died instantly as 6 SWAT officers stepped out in full tactical gear. The morning sun glinted off their helmets and vests, and the air filled with the sharp crackle of radios. One officer raised his hand and said firmly, "Ma'am, step back and drop what's in your hands." Karen froze, still clutching her clipboard like it was a shield. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. For once, the queen of control had no words. Ryan, my cousin, recognized her instantly from my complaints. He told me later that her eyes darted everywhere. At the weapons, the uniforms, the armored truck parked behind the cabin, and she began stammering something about inspection rights. The officers weren't amused. They were mid-drill, testing their response to rural property intrusions, and here was a real intruder walking right into their operation. One of them gently but firmly guided her down the steps while another secured her purse and phone for safety. Karen, flustered and red-faced, tried to regain her authority. "I'm the HOA president," she shouted. "You can't treat me like this. This is community property." The lead officer tilted his head. "Ma'am, this isn't community property. You're trespassing on private land during an active police training exercise." Her face turned ghost white. She started babbling excuses, something about safety checks, fire hazards, and neighborhood standards, but no one was listening. The situation was officially out of her control. As the officers radioed the local sheriff to report the incident, Karen sat on the porch steps, trembling, her clipboard lying in the dirt beside her. The same clipboard she'd used to intimidate others now symbolized everything she'd lost in one foolish, entitled act. By the time I pulled up the gravel driveway, the flashing red and blue lights were already cutting through the trees. My heart pounded as I parked beside the sheriff's cruiser and jumped out. Karen was standing near the porch, hands cuffed behind her back, cheeks flushed with fury and humiliation. The SWAT team had already cleared the scene, their gear packed, but the tension hung thick in the air. The deputies stood beside her, listening as she ranted about her right to inspect and community safety standards. When she saw me walking up, her expression twisted from panic to anger. "There he is," she shouted, pointing at me as if I were the criminal. "He's the one violating neighborhood codes. I have every right to inspect his property." The sheriff, a calm man I'd spoken to before, turned to her and said evenly, "Ma'am, this land isn't under your HO. You've trespassed and damaged private property." Her jaw dropped and she sputtered something about maps and boundaries, insisting she was just trying to maintain order. Ryan, still in uniform, stepped forward and handed over a copy of the training authorization. "She walked right into a live police exercise," he said dryly. Could have gotten herself shot. The deputies exchanged looks of disbelief. Karen's voice wavered as the weight of her mistake finally settled on her. I didn't say much, just stood there watching as her confidence crumbled. She looked smaller, frilier, like all the bluster that kept her upright had drained away. When the sheriff told her she'd be cited for trespassing and property damage, she gasped as if he'd struck her. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. But he could, and he did. For the first time, Karen realized her rules meant nothing beyond the borders of her little kingdom. In the days that followed, the fallout from Karen's stunt spread faster than wildfire through the nearby community. I filed an official report with the sheriff's department, and Ryan helped attach the security footage to the case file. The video clearly showed Karen cutting my lock and walking straight into the property. When the HOA board found out, they tried to spin the story, claiming there had been a jurisdiction misunderstanding. But that excuse didn't hold up when confronted with the evidence. The local news picked up the story briefly, painting her as an overzealous HOA president who crossed the line, literally. Karen's allies on the board were desperate to protect themselves. They sent me a letter filled with apologies and legal jargon, offering to resolve the matter quietly. What they really wanted was to avoid a lawsuit. I wasn't interested in money. I wanted accountability. So, I pushed forward with a restraining order. Within a week, the court approved it. Karen was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my property. When the deputies served her the order, I heard she screamed at them, insisting she had community rights. But behind the scenes, her fellow HOA members were abandoning her one by one. The board hired a lawyer to handle the fallout, and word spread that several homeowners were questioning years of arbitrary fines and harassment. I started getting quiet messages from neighbors thanking me for standing up to her. Apparently Karen had made plenty of enemies over the years, people who were too scared to challenge her. Now her power was unraveling. For the first time since moving into my cabin, I felt like the balance had shifted. The fear she'd spread through the neighborhood was finally being replaced by something better: justice. The neighborhood was in chaos after the incident. Once Karen's arrest and the SWAT mix-up became public, everyone in the HOA began pointing fingers. The same people who once praised her leadership now claimed they had always disagreed with her methods. At community meetings, shouting matches broke out over missing funds, questionable fines, and power abuse. The once untouchable HOA board was crumbling from within, and for the first time, people started speaking openly about how Karen had bullied them for years. Some even admitted they'd paid fees she made up on the spot just to be left alone. Karen, meanwhile, was suspended from her HOA position pending an internal investigation. The official notice was posted on the community bulletin board, and by evening, someone had scrawled across it in red marker, "Finally." Her house, once the pristine model of HOA perfection, sat quiet. Her manicured garden grew wild, and the mailbox overflowed with letters she refused to collect. One afternoon, a couple from the HOA stopped by my gate to apologize. They explained how Karen had convinced them my cabin fell under her authority because of an outdated boundary map. In truth, she had been lying to everyone for years, expanding her influence one property at a time. With her gone, residents realized how much power they had handed her without question. Meetings turned into debates about dissolving the HOA altogether. Some neighbors cheered the idea of finally being free from endless regulations, while others feared what came next. I stayed out of it mostly, content to watch the empire Karen built collapse under its own arrogance. The fear that once lingered in everyone's voices had disappeared. In its place was something refreshing: defiance, independence, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice take root. It didn't take long for the story to spread beyond the mountain community. A local news station got hold of the bodycam footage from the deputies, and soon the headline appeared on every screen: HOA president arrested after breaking into private cabin during SWAT drill. The footage went viral within hours. There was Karen standing frozen on my porch, surrounded by tactical officers. Her trembling voice could be heard insisting she was just performing an inspection. The internet tore her apart. Comment sections filled with people mocking her arrogance, calling her HOA Karen, clipboard commander, and worse. For someone who thrived on control and image, the public humiliation was unbearable. Neighbors told me she tried to explain herself on a community Facebook page, claiming the news had taken it out of context. But when she started threatening to sue commenters, the group's moderators banned her entirely. Even her closest allies on the HOA board distanced themselves, issuing a public statement about individual actions not reflecting the organization. Her employer, a local real estate office, didn't take kindly to the publicity either. Within a week, Karen was quietly let go. The same woman who once lorded over others, demanding compliance and perfection, was suddenly invisible. I heard she stopped leaving her house altogether, curtains always drawn, her garden overgrown. For me, the whole thing was surreal. I hadn't wanted revenge, just peace, but watching her empire crumble felt like the universe balancing itself. I received a few interview requests from reporters, but I turned them all down. The story didn't need more attention. It had already done its job. Karen had built her reputation on intimidation, and now her own ego had destroyed it piece by piece in full public view. You said. Expand Chapter 10 on 300 words without heading. ChatGPT said. Months passed and life finally returned to the quiet rhythm I'd been searching for when I first bought the cabin. The pine trees swayed softly in the wind again. The lake mirrored the sky, and the air carried nothing but birdsong. The chaos Karen had unleashed was finally over. The HOA, stripped of its tyrannical leadership and weighed down by lawsuits and public embarrassment, officially voted to disband. The remaining members formed a small neighborhood committee focused on community projects, not control. They even sent me a handwritten apology for the stress their former president had caused. I framed it and hung it inside the cabin, a small reminder of how far things had come. Karen, on the other hand, moved away quietly one morning. A neighbor said a moving truck came just after dawn, her car packed with boxes and her garden left to die. No one came to say goodbye. She'd gone from self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood to a ghost people barely mentioned. The silence she left behind was almost poetic. I replaced the broken lock with a reinforced gate and added new security cameras that sent live alerts to my phone. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about peace of mind. Sometimes at night, when the fire crackles and the forest hums, I think back to that chaotic morning when Karen's obsession collided with reality. The image of her standing before a line of armed officers always makes me shake my head. Now my days are simple. I wake up to sunlight filtering through the trees, work on small repairs, and fish in the lake when the weather's kind. The cabin is mine, untouched and finally free from interference. After all the noise and confrontation, the mountains have given me what I wanted all along: peace.